Hey, welcome to Tabletop Skirmish Games. I'm Lee, and in this video I'll show you how I painted the bell tower from the Warcry Catacombs box set. In this video we're going to concentrate on the bell, the skeletons and the metalwork. If you'd like to see how I did the stone and the wood for this piece, then I'll put a link in the description below to my other video, and I'll also put a link on the screen here. The stonework and the woodwork is quite a simple technique with just a few colours of washes and dry brushing, so I don't want to repeat that here. But the whole model was primed with the Army Painter Necrotic Flesh spray can, and before I did the bell, the skeletons and the metalwork, I made sure all the woodwork and the stonework was complete. I'll leave a link below to my website where you can find a list of all the paints I've used and a free paint recipe. I'll also put links to all the paints in the description below. These will be affiliate links, but they don't cost you anything. In fact, they're going to save you money up to 20% off the RRP, and any sales made through those links, I get a small commission, and that helps me develop the channel, and I really appreciate your support. Okay, so let's get started. So first I did the skeletons, and for that I used the contrast paint Skeleton Horde, and I made sure to give it a really good shake. That's really important with these paints, to make sure all the pigment is combined. And then just straight out the pot, I just loaded my brush, took away the excess, and then just applied it quite generously to the skeletons. I started where I wanted most of that shade to build up, in the rib cage there, so I put quite a bit of paint on and then worked my way out. The good thing with the contrast paint is it likes to go into those recesses, and if it starts to pool on the surfaces or the more raised areas where you want the highlight, you can just kind of tease it out and help it along. You could add a highlight here of a shabty bone, and that's the same highlight we used on the stonework, but for me the skeletons were fine as they were. Okay, now moving on to the bell, I'm going to use a base coat of lead belcher, and that's for the bell, those metal pieces and the little handles and even the little nails and rivets you see around the woodwork. I just take a medium brush for this, give the paint a really good shake. Again, with a metallic paints, it's really important to give that a good mix. And then just from the lid of the paint, I make sure it's not gloopy, put a little bit on my brush at a time, and then just start to coat the whole bell. For the smaller kind of miniatures, I'd use a palette for this metallic paint, a dry palette. But for a big piece like this bell, I'm just going to use it straight out the pot. And there we go, so that's the whole bell coated now, and as you can see, that's given a nice rich base. All the little clasps and handles are painted, the metal around the wood there, and the small nails that are going into the wood too. Next I added a highlight, and that's with the Vallejo 0.997 silver. Again, a really good shake, and with these bottles I just squirted a little bit out onto the wet palette. Often these wet palettes don't work well with metallic paint, but just for this small amount I was using, I just carried on with my wet palette. So I loaded the brush, and it's just a small old brush this time. Took most of the paint off on a paper towel, and then I'm just going to give a little highlight on those raised areas, and then I'm looking at where the light is naturally falling on that bell, and then following those lines, using that as my guide to give a nice bright highlight. And I continued that highlight on all the other pieces of metal on the building there, and including the handles, the clasps and the nails. Now we're going to take this from a nice silver to more of a brassy goldy look, and this is an effect I really like to use, which is taking a contrast paint and applying it over the metallic base. And so I'm taking a Guilliman Flesh, giving it a good shake, a tidy medium brush, just a cheap brush, nothing fancy, and then I'm going to coat that over the entire bell. So I'm making sure that I end my brush strokes where I want most of that paint to build up, and that's a really good tip that I learned and put into practice, and it does make a huge difference. Also, where the paint starts to build up on those flatter, more raised areas where I want more of a highlight, I'm just working that paint away and spreading it around so there's not too much of a build up. The main place you want this paint is right in those details where it's all the like skull, in the eye sockets, and where all the writing is kind of carved in at the bottom. For the other metallic parts of this piece, we got to give a wash too, and I'll use Agrax Earthshade for this. You could use Nuln Oil, but I want to keep a kind more of a brown tone. So I gave that a good shake, and I'm just going to apply that all over the parts of the model, the hooks, the clasps, the handles and the nails. Now with the shade done, I wanted to move on and just bring a bit more metallic look to that bell. And this is a different technique I'm going to use for this. And so I took some Balthazar gold and gave that a really good shake. This is another base paint. I'll give that a good shake. And just with a really old brush this time, an old like rough bristly brush, you can see here it's seen better days. I just kind of dip that in, and like we do with the dry brushing, I'm just going to work most of that paint off on a paper towel, but I am going to leave a little bit more on there than we normally would for dry brushing. And now I'm going to do like an overbrush stipple effect over the whole bell, and this is going to add some texture, and it's also going to allow some of those coats and colours and textures from underneath to come through. Now it's time to add another highlight. So with Vallejo 0.996 gold, I give that a good shake. I just put a little bit on my paper towel because we're not going to use a lot here. And then with a kind of medium old brush, I just load the bristles. I'm going to work most of it off now because this is going to be a dry brushing effect. And then I'm going to dry brush all along the most raised areas where I want that extra highlight to show through. And again, I'm using the kind of natural light that's coming down to give me an indication of where that would catch. And there we go. That's the bell highlighted now, and that's way too shiny. That's not going to cut it in the 8 points. So we're going to dirty this up and move on to another wash. This time it's Agrax Earthshade, and this is going to be a nice coat to dirty the bell, give some more shadow in those deeper recesses, and it also ties it in with the other parts of the metal, and the nice brown in there is going to work well with the wood as well. And again, I'm just using it straight out of the pot for this big piece, and I'm going to apply that all over and making sure to finish my brush strokes where I want most of it to pool, making sure those smoother areas don't have too much of the shade. So this is still going to allow those highlights to come through, but just going to dull it down and give it more of an aged look. There we go. With that dried up, it now looks a lot dirtier, like an old bell, but we've really got to give it some weathering, and for that we're going to use the Nahylac Oxide. I used this in a previous video on the bridges and I was quite subtle with it, but this time for the bell I've looked online at some real life kind of weathered Verdigris bells, and it looks like they're completely covered in it, and it really works right in highlighting over where the kind of recesses are, but the whole bell itself is quite patchy, so I want to give that effect on the bell for the bell tower. So I took my Nahylac Oxide, a really good shake, and this is like a chalky paint once it's dried, and so it's really going to give us that nice effect. And these technical paints I found are really cool, and they give some really nice effects. So I load up a medium brush, and now I'm just covering the whole bell in the Nahylac Oxide, and I'm working into the areas that I think is going to build up the most, working all around, spreading that around there. I don't want it too thick, as certainly on those more raised areas that are going to be sticking out more. I don't want it to build up too thick there. It's more in the recesses. So it's pretty scary taking this bell that I really like the effect I've got already, and then just covering it in this paint. But there's no way we could have a shiny bell like that in the setting and the narrative of the 8 points. So I'm adding it on. Of course you don't have to. There's other ways you can make the bell look more worn and weathered and damaged. But for me, I wanted to give this effect a go. I'd never done it like this before, so I wanted to see how it would turn out. At the end of the day, it's only paint, so if I don't like it, I could always clean it up and start again. I've also got another one of these bell towers on order, so I'm going to use that and do a different paint scheme on it. I'll do another video for that because it'll be quite different to this one. So now I'm trying to recreate that patchy effect I saw on those photos of the real bells. So I'm just taking a little bit more and just popping it on in different places where I think it could kind of look naturally where it would build up. And there we are. That's the bell after about an hour of drying. That's what it looks like. But I found after a couple of days, and certainly a week later, that's really chalky paint has kind of dried out completely and left a really nice effect. Of course, the bell looked cool before, but with this Nahylac Oxide added all over it, I think it fits in a lot better with my setting. So that's it. I'll leave it there. Thanks so much for watching. Please like if you like the video, subscribe for more content like this, and don't forget to hit that notification bell to join me next time on Tabletop Skirmish Games.